Hi everyone, this is my second Wizard of Oz video. If you're just stopping by to see a regular old sketchbook video, you might be a bit confused because I am going to be spending this video talking about what I didn't get to bring up in my last video, my Wizard of Oz deep dive. At the start of the year, I read all 14 of the original Wizard of Oz books, so I made a sort of video essay talking about the themes and the plot points of each book. I had to skip a lot because it was just way too long, and my original plan for that video was to combine it with this. I was going to show off all the sketches that I had made while I was reading the books and finally ink them out and have like a really good sketchbook time because I haven't had the time to work in my sketchbook for real since I got back from my work trip. But the video was just way too long and I already had to skip some things that I'm going to be talking about in this one, so I figured I could just split them into two parts. So if you want to see the video essay, please check it out. It is pretty long. I posted it last week. I understand if you don't want to sit through all of that since I am primarily an art channel, and I can understand if that's not really your cup of tea, but I did work really hard on it and I'm going to keep talking about Wizard of Oz in this, so you can just ignore me and just watch me sketch, I guess, if that's what you're into, because really what's the difference? I ramble on in every single one of my sketchbook videos anyway. Now, if you did watch my Wizard of Oz video, or if you actually read the series, you might recognize quite a few of these characters, but I'm going to explain who everyone is at the end of the video. So the first thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to my previous video was I wanted to give out a disclaimer. I had to cut out a lot of my intro from that first video because the video was just way too long, and if I cut anything else, it wouldn't have made sense. But disclaimer number one, name pronunciation. A lot of these names are fake. A lot of these names are just made up and they sound a little silly, and some of them I don't know if I'm even pronouncing correctly. And so in the first videos, sometimes I pronounce them one way and then I'll say them another way. I don't know the real way that you're supposed to say them, and I refuse to learn. Disclaimer number two would be that I jumped over multiple plot points. Now, I did say that earlier, and I do say that in my previous video, but there's so much going on in all of these books that sometimes I just had to skip over them, especially if the book wasn't really my favorite and I didn't want to spend too long talking about it. So just know there's so much happening in these books. And if you're actually interested after everything that I said in the first book series, please read them if you want to, because there's a lot going on and I had to skip over a lot of things. And you're definitely going to see some characters in this sketchbook that I just never brought up, but are really like interesting to me. They just weren't that relevant. And that leads me to disclaimer number three, which is that the Wizard of Oz series definitely has what I like to call comic book logic in terms of continuity. If you've ever tried to get into any kind of old school comic, then you know that sometimes when you read a specific story, a specific volume, they just kind of ignore things and expect you as the audience to also ignore them for the sake of the arc that they're currently going through. And you're just going to have to suck it up when it comes to the Oz franchise. There's a lot of established things in the first few books that get completely retconned, or things that happen that get completely ignored later on, and you're just gonna have to deal with that. It's part of the fun. It can be frustrating if you're expecting like linear storytelling, I guess, but honestly, just kind of think of it like a comic book, or like you would like an old school Saturday cartoon where things happen in one episode and then they never get brought up again. Just kind of live with it, really. Disclaimer number four would be the importance of some characters. There are characters that literally show up in almost every single book in the series, but if they didn't play like a big role in the storyline that I was specifically discussing, then I didn't bring them up. But that doesn't mean that they just kind of disappear. A good example of this would be Bellina the chicken. She's in a lot of the books. I just didn't bring it up if it wasn't relevant. Similarly, the Tin Man, Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, they show up a lot because they're Dorothy's friends, but if they're not really important in the plot line, or if they don't do something to move the story forward, then I just didn't bring them up. But just know that they don't just disappear when I don't bring them up. They're there all the time. They're really good friends of Dorothy, so they're gonna be there all the time. Similarly, there are some one-off characters that I never bring up ever because they really only show up in one book. They don't have any like speaking roles. They don't have any dialogue, but they're pretty important to what happens in the storyline. And then I kick myself for not even bringing it up. And a good example of that would be the King of Ev. Since the Gnome King is obviously more relevant, since he is a constant recurring character in the rest of the series. I brought him up as the primary antagonist when I was talking about the third book, even though that one definitely has quite a few obstacles. And one of the things that I omitted was talking about the King of Ev, King Ivoldo. The only reason that the Gnome King is able to do all of this in the first place is because he had actually sold his entire family to the Gnome King, and then he felt so bad about it that King Ivoldo threw himself into the sea, and I assume died, but since they retcon death itself, who's really to say? I also didn't feel the need to bring up certain magical objects, but there are some that show up in multiple books, like the Shaggy Man's love magnet. There's even a whole backstory to how he got the magnet that I just omitted. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in this video was just the general geography of Oz, because even though there's so much happening, and I do think that I explained myself pretty well by using all the maps in my previous video, there's just so much information that I thought I would explain a little bit more in this video. And the reason that I bring this up is that when I was editing my previous video, I noticed that I kept saying Oz as just a quick way to say that they were now in like fairy country or something, and I wasn't being very specific because sometimes they weren't actually in Oz. They were in a land near Oz and had to walk to Oz, and so things were a little bit different. And I feel like by saying, oh, they're in Oz now, maybe that was a bit confusing to people who haven't read the book. So a good example of this would be the book The Road to Oz. If I remember correctly, when I was talking about the book The Road to Oz, I bring up that when Dorothy is helping the Shaggy Man and they both get lost and they make it to that place that's like 7 pathways and they pick one and they end up in Oz, they're not really in Oz itself. They are in fairyland. They're not in Oz because they have to walk to get to Oz. And that's why all of the kingdoms and the people that they meet are bringing up Ozma's birthday party and hoping to get an invite because they're not in Oz. They're from a different land. I just kind of use it as like a shortcut, I guess, instead of having to say they're in a land adjacent to Oz. I just hope that that wasn't confusing. That's why they have to cross the deadly desert in the Road to Oz to make it to the Emerald City. They're in a different land. They're in, I guess, what you would call non-Estica. Made a similar mistake that I caught when I was editing, when I was talking about Queen Anne, when I was talking about her kingdom, because I kept saying that her kingdom was in Oz. I hope that I was able to edit all of that out. She's not in Oz because that's the entire point of her marching to Oz to try to conquer them. She's in a land adjacent to Oz. She was invited to Ozma's birthday party in the Road to Oz. She's in a completely different kingdom. It's just sometimes it can be a bit confusing when I'm trying to explain how the geography in Oz works, because there are smaller kingdoms and small little villages inside Oz that Ozma is in control of that are just not the Emerald City. So I hope I made that clear in this video. And if you're still confused, please let me know, because I get it. There's just a lot happening. I don't know. Maybe this is not important to literally anybody else. It's just every time I said Oz when they were just a neighboring kingdom, I felt like if I was saying the United States when I'm talking about Toronto, Canada. You know what I mean? And for anyone who's wondering what I'm using in my sketchbook pages right now, it's nothing fancy. Even though this is my quote unquote pretty sketchbook, I was not really focused on making anything pretty or having a good composition. I really just wanted an excuse to draw. I haven't done anything in this sketchbook for so long that at first I felt a little bit rusty. So I just wanted to give myself an excuse to make something, even if it wasn't really pretty, even if the colors didn't make any sense. I just wanted to draw. And so some of it is literally just office supplies. I don't remember the brand off the top of my head, but the pens that I'm using are these fine tip pens that my mom got at like Office Depot or something. She uses them for work and she left them on the table, and I like to borrow them from her sometimes because they're like fine tip and they're in a bunch of different colors and they don't bleed through. But you could do this with literally any ballpoint pen. And also, I don't even suggest you use these necessarily for what I'm doing because they get really smudgy sometimes. I'm also using some of my highlighters and just some assorted coloring pencils. As you can probably tell, I don't really care what brand of coloring pencils that I use because I don't really use coloring pencils professionally. I really only use them in my sketchbook. So I just have a bunch of color-coded like mugs in my room, just full of different coloring pencils. I have Prismacolors, I have Crayola, I have off-brand coloring pencils. I have those old erasable Crayolas. Like, it literally does not matter. I have a bunch. And I also have these like rainbow coloring pencils that I only ever use when I'm drawing polychrome. I say this literally all the time. Thrifting begins at home, even if that means finding art supplies in the bins of your old kindergarten stuff. I also very briefly use some of my old dyeing gel pens and a posca marker. Even though I'm sure these would have looked delightful with my Copic markers or some kind of alcohol marker, just so that the colors wouldn't be as streaky, I didn't want anything to bleed through because, once again, I'm just doodling here. I didn't want to commit to anything. I don't care if it's a little ugly. Another thing that I wanted to bring up was the ages in The Wizard of Oz, because that can also be a little bit confusing if you've never read the books. So Dorothy does not have a canon age. She is just described as being a little girl, and I guess you could interpret that as her being 8, her being 10, her being 12. Like, really, I think anything goes depending on who the artist is, especially considering that in a lot of movie adaptations, she's around the 10 to 12 range. In my head, Dorothy is definitely aging in the first few books, because in the first book, I imagined her to be around 8 or 9, and then time is described as passing in between the first time that she's in Oz and the next time that she's in Oz. And from then on, I'm pretty sure she's just supposed to be just a general 11 to 12-year-old. And that's where things get a little bit tricky with the whole continuity thing, because since they decided that death just doesn't exist and Baum just kind of kept writing them the same, I guess that it's just kind of like when you watch a cartoon and the character's the same age forever. But I do think it would be interesting to see Dorothy grow up as the books continue. So I don't know how I feel about that, really. And this also leads me to question how old Ozma is supposed to be as well, because I always assumed that they were around the same age, right? Because Ozma is described as maybe looking like 1 or 2 years older than Dorothy, but they're definitely peers. They're definitely each other's best friends. I never interpreted Ozma as feeling particularly really old compared to Dorothy, but since they decided that Ozma was like this, I guess, immortal fairy, it leads to like questions of, will Dorothy ever age? Will Ozma ever age? Are they just kind of permanently stuck as being 11 to 13? And if you decide that all the continuity changes are canon, if death doesn't exist, does aging? Because there are elderly characters. So I think it's just safer to just imagine that this world has comic book logic and no one changes at all. And I only bring this up for 2 reasons. The first one being, when I was telling my friends who have never read the books about the books that I was reading, a lot of them expressed confusion because since they had only ever seen Judy Garland's Dorothy, a lot of them thought that Dorothy was supposed to be around 16 years old or even older, because a lot of adaptations of The Wizard of Oz age her up a little bit. And the second reason why I feel the need to clarify is because when I was doing my research about the Oz fandom, I guess, after reading the book, there's a lot of discussion about Dorothy's relationship to Ozma. Specifically because, like I said in my previous video, a lot of fans of the Wizard of Oz franchise tend to see Dorothy and Ozma's relationship as kind of a crush or a young romance. It's not canon. You don't have to read it that way. I wouldn't say that L Frank Baum was trying to make it queer-coded, but because a lot of queer Wizard of Oz fans see themselves in both Dorothy and Ozma for various reasons, and then see their relationship as a very cute kind of thing. A lot of pushback against it is that the fans are sexualizing Dorothy and Ozma, and I've never read it that way at all. I kind of see it in the same light that some people would see Wendy and Peter Pan. Like, it's just a cute relationship. I don't see why anyone would find it problematic. Another thing that I wish I could have spent more time on in my previous video was whenever I talked about the Cowardly Lion and how he views his courage. I very casually mentioned in the previous video that after a certain point, the lion doesn't really see himself as a very brave person, despite everything that he went through in the first book, whereas the Scarecrow and the Tin Man are very grateful to the wizard, even though he was outed as a fraud, because they genuinely think that he helped them. And I personally think that it's because L Frank Baum didn't really know what to do with the lion after the first book. Regardless, I do think it's really interesting that the lion seems to be the only character who views the wizard's gifts as exactly what they were, a placebo. He knows he needs to work on himself. Another thing that I didn't really get to talk about too much in my previous video, but I really wanted to mention is actually on this page, and that is Santa Claus cameo. If you didn't watch my previous video, yes, you heard that right, Santa Claus cameo. Santa Claus shows up canonically in the land of Oz in the Road to Oz. And in my previous video, I just kind of say, oh, Santa Claus is here for some reason, and I move on. But there actually is a reason that he's there. L Frank Baum didn't just write the Wizard of Oz books. He actually wrote a bunch of other short stories, articles. I bring up some criticism of it in my previous video. But one of the things that he wrote was the life and adventures of Santa Claus. And if that sounds in any way familiar to you, it's probably because, like me, you had a very similar childhood experience of watching a lot of random Rankin and Bass Christmas movies around the holidays. More specifically, a very fantastical movie where Santa Claus is an infant child raised by a wood nymph in a magical forest. I somehow watch that movie almost every freaking year on ABC Family around the holidays, as well as read 14 books by the same author and didn't know that L Frank Baum wrote that other book until I was doing research on why the hell Santa Claus even showed up in the 5th book of the Oz franchise. It really just goes to show you that every single one of my interests are somehow heavily connected, because every year for Christmas, I make a Rankin and Bassified character from a movie that I, for some reason, watch on Christmas that has nothing to do with Christmas. And I myself have made Rankin and Bass style drawings of Dorothy Gale herself, based off of characters that show up in Rankin and Bass movies, like The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. I literally have a Pinterest board with all of these characters in them, and I used the wood nymph as one of my references to make Dorothy, not knowing that the wood nymph was a character invented by L Frank Baum also. Life is weird. The last thing that I want to bring up before I share all of my sketches in this video is Glinda. I feel like I criticized her quite a bit in my previous video. The gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss of it all kind of took over me, and I just want to make sure that you guys know that I made her sound way more sinister than she probably is meant to be, because I like hyperbole. What can I say? I obviously don't have to go through my critiques of the series. Again, I went through that in the previous video. I don't want to bore you with it. However, even though I have valid critiques, I don't want to make it sound as if L Frank Baum was consciously making her this like villainous person. She's definitely a character that is supposed to be kind and loving and is always helpful in every single one of the books. I just criticize the way that the books are written because of, colonialism. But yeah, Glinda is not meant to be villainous or sinister in any way. It's just, it kind of reads like that when you think about the fact that she has the Book of Records. But yeah, in my head, there's definitely a bit of an underhandedness that she may possess, but I don't think that's supposed to be canon. I just want to make that clear in case you watch the first video and you think that if you're going to read the books that Glinda is going to become this like hidden mastermind or something. She's not. She's definitely supposed to be cute and fun. I just don't think all of the actions that she does are cute and fun. It's kind of like the way that some people that really love Princess Bubblegum from Adventure Time call her a tyrant. I don't think you're supposed to think that she is one, but some of the scenes are definitely dark. It also doesn't help that despite wanting to come into these books completely unbiased, I am a person that experiences a lot of pop culture all the time. So even though it's not canon at all, in my brain, Glinda has just kind of become this composite character of all the different versions of Glinda, good or bad. And in the back of my mind, there's always going to be the way that she's interpreted in the Wicked musical, in the Wicked book, and the fact that everyone always makes that meme about how when she meets Dorothy in the 1939 film, she says, "Are you a good witch or are you a bad witch?" Knowing that later she's going to say that only bad witches are ugly. Like, girl, like, I need you guys to understand that when I went on my work trip and we went to go see The Wiz, the girls that I work with specifically asked me how I feel about Glinda after reading all of the books, because since they had only ever seen the 1939 film, they genuinely all believed that Glinda must have had some kind of hidden agenda that was going to pop up in other books. And I had to explain that no, that's just a composite character. Glinda does not show up at the start of the book. She didn't send Dorothy on some kind of wild goose chase on purpose, but because it's so ingrained in people's brains, it's just easier to assume that Glinda is just kind of this Sharpay Evans style character. So even though I know that none of that is actually canon, Glinda does have certain traits that just maybe didn't age well, like the Book of Records. And so it is kind of fun to imagine that she's just not all there. She's not always that nice, but that's not canon. That's just how I see her in my brain. Please know that. I read the 14 original books and now my head has turned to mush and I have fanon interpretations in my brain because I love these characters. So that's kind of where I am right now. And if any of you guys are interested, I also have a private Wizard of Oz playlist where I put in anything that I watched while reading the books, so I can make that public if you guys want. Out of all my sketches, we have Button Bright as a fox. So this is after they transform his head. Same thing with the Shaggy Man, but apparently I suck at drawing donkeys from memory because what is that? This is Bellina with her chicks. I don't know if I brought this up in the last video, but she names all of her chicks, whether they're boys or girls, after Dorothy. This is supposed to be the guard from the first book that tells Dorothy to go to Glinda. This is the Shaggy Man again as a donkey. I genuinely love this look way more than whatever I was going for here. But once again, what is that? It's clearly not a donkey. These are different versions of the Love Magnet. In my head, I was picturing this one, but honestly, this one might be my favorite. This is my baby boy, Jack Pumpkinhead. I love how long and awkward looking he is. And I love that he kind of looks like he's from the 70s for some reason. This is just a little I Love Ozma button that I think he would own. These are supposed to be the Scarecrow's brains, but really, what is that? This is the Shaggy Man when he's not a donkey. He's complaining about how people just love him too much now that he has the magnet. This is supposed to be Button Bright, what he always looks like without the fox head, but he's crying because he's lost, because he's always lost, isn't he? This is supposed to be Dorothy, and here it says she just killed someone because, you know, before they changed the continuity issues, she, you know, her house did technically land on somebody, so she feels like a murderer. I don't know. This is the king of Bunnyberry. I did not bring that up in the last video because there's just so many villages, so many little kingdoms that why bring that up? It's not really that relevant, but I am obsessed with him. This is my version of Scraps. I drew her like this because I like that in the book it is constantly mentioned that she needs to like fix the fluff that she has inside of her because it all goes down to like her bottom. So pear-shaped queen. This is the Woozy. This is Scraps, Scarecrow, and the Tin Man being a queer platonic threesome, I guess. This is Polychrome. And in my head, for some reason, I always pictured Polychrome as having her hair, like, always up in the wind, not really human. So that's what she looks like. I added a little sticker here because I thought it was the perfect size. This is her father going away without her. This is T.E. Wogglebug, who is very pretentious, and I love him despite that. And his little school pills. I don't know if I brought this up in the last video either because there's so much information, but he has this weird thing where once he makes a school, he invents these little pills so that people can get all of their knowledge from pills, and so there's actually no point in having a school, but I consider it the AI of education. I want to learn. I don't just want to pop a pill, thank you, unless it's math. These are the citizens of Bunbury. That's another kingdom that I didn't bring up. They come out in the same book as this one. They're basically made out of dough. This is Ozga. I hated the sketch, and now I love her. I think it was the pink that I added. Now she looks really cute. This is the Shaggy Man's brother, who is ugly, as we all know. This is the glass cat, some spectacles, the little kiss. This is Dorothy as a lamb, because I thought it was adorable. This is the Queen of the Field Mice. She's in the first book. This is a China doll. She's in the first book. These are the brains that the flatheads would carry around, but let's be honest, it just kind of looks like a solo cup. This is Dorothy, Betsy, and Trot. I love that they're like a little human girl trio. This is the lion when he gets turned into a human. This is the Hungry Tiger. Once again, always talking about eating babies. This is supposed to be like magic fruit. So this is from Trot's book. And then this is the peach that Ozma gets turned into in one of the other books. I didn't bring it up because once again, I didn't think it was relevant, but it's here for posterity. This is a telescopic eye. I thought it would be funny if, in a very cartoonish manner, her eyeball would just like come out of her head. Like, I don't know. It's there. I thought it was funny. These are the 3 adepts in a bucket of water. This is Queen Lorene. We never see her, but I think in my head, she's like beautiful. This is the Tin Man and the Scarecrow after they get turned by the Yukuhu. And this is Polychrome, who also gets turned into a bird by the Yukuhu, and Emerald. These are little tiny citizens. I think it's Utensia. It's a place where everything is made, where everyone's like a utensil. I don't know how to describe that well. Literally like walking pans and cheese graters, and they talk, and they have a system of government, whatever. This is Jellia Jam. I love her, but in my head, I'm always picturing a Mad Men kind of secretary. I don't know why. This is supposed to be the wizard. This is Eureka the cat after she gets put on trial for murder. This is the little king teddy bear from the book where Ozma gets lost, and his little bear who can like search for magic things. And I love this because when it doesn't work, when he doesn't find the peach that is essentially Ozma, everyone thinks that he's broken, he must not work, and he gets so offended on his behalf, and I think that's precious. This is TikTok, not as cute as he should have been, but I love the way the colors look. And here he says, my creators are on the moon, because that's why they never show up. They're literally on the moon. This is the Queen of the Skeezers when she gets turned to a swan. This is my interpretation of Glinda. I kept changing her in my head for some reason, because I do think the whole pink outfit is pretty iconic. But the Quadling country where she lives is actually red. So in my head, she's always pink, but I know that's not the case. I have a problem with that. This is the Deadly Desert. This is the Wizard's air balloon. This is Glinda's army of women, which once again, once they decided that death no longer exists, kind of useless, but let's go lesbians. This is Santa Claus, who is canonically a fairy, as I mentioned before. This is Superman and Dorothy, because when I read the first, I want to say 3 to 4 books, I kept envisioning a world where Dorothy grew up and like eventually met a young Clark Kent, or a world where their timelines were around the same time, so like where he was already Superman and she was going to Oz, and she's convinced that Superman is just a fairy and not an alien. I was having a fan fiction in my head, and then once it was revealed that, you know, Dorothy ends up staying in Oz forever, that kind of crushed my little fanfic in my head, but I think they're cute. And then finally we have Dorothy and Ozma, best friends. And I think this is really cute. There are a couple, I did make this with the intention of just sketching, but there are a few that I do think could be cute little stickers, at least for me. I don't know if there's actually like a demand for Wizard of Oz stickers that aren't specifically related to the 1939 film, but they're very cute and I love them, and I would like a little sticker of them, even if it's just for me. And I do think this could sell whether or not you know the context, because come on. This little grumpy teddy bear came with another little baby teddy bear. That's cute. I think she came out really cute. I don't know why. Same thing here, but I don't think anyone would want that one. She came out really pretty. Very cute, very cute. Some of them are not my favorite, but once again, this was just me trying to get back into the rhythm, back into sketching, because I haven't done that in so long. So I'm actually very happy that I took the time to do this. And yeah, I loved talking about The Wizard of Oz. I think I'm going to stop talking about The Wizard of Oz now because I got 2 videos out of my system and I think I'm done here.